there's a degree of transparency with nuclear forces from a pure deterrence and awareness and safety perspective. It's unclear that after this attack, any country with nuclear weapons can afford to let their strategic bombers out in the open, even if it means that previous nuclear limitations treaties required they be out in the open so we could monitor. That was a very good thing. That's the type of thing that you need to have in a Cold War situation. That's not sustainable anymore if you can get civilian drones in, or if you could convert civilian drones into military use and then launch these attacks within the country. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And, you know, you saw it also. The ability to use these relatively small, relatively low-tech and easily accessible drones to inflict significant damage, I mean, it really does level the playing field of warfighting in a way that should be very troubling to the U.S. You know, we see it certainly here in Ukraine, where increasingly it is a drone war, where you have drones fighting against other drones. You also saw it to a certain degree on October 7th, where Hamas, the first thing that they were able to do was to take out the very high-tech fence, multi-million-dollar fence that Israel had built along the Gaza border, including, you know, automated machine guns and surveillance. So they're able to take those out, and that's how they're able to effectuate their attacks on October 7th. So, you know, this was a complicated operation that Ukraine was able to pull off. The U.S. claims they had no idea this was coming. I don't know whether that's true or not. There would be some interest both from the Ukrainians and the U.S. if they did collaborate to deny that there was any sort of coordination or collaboration. So I'm not sure if that's true or not. But this was a complicated operation to pull off. At the same time, the tech is very easily available and very low cost. And so, you know, obviously the reason for Zelensky to do this at this particular point in time is because there are peace talks ongoing. The general consensus is that Russia is in a much stronger position than Ukraine is because they have much more manpower and they might have much more industrial might than the Ukrainians do. And so this is an effort to say, look, this is not, you know, the playing field is more level than you think, and we can inflict damage on you deep into your territory that, you know, and it doesn't require the assistance of the United States of America to be able to pull this off. Yeah, I know. And the way to understand the Russian position right now is there's some good reporting. The Russians are moving miles a day. They're sort of advancing into Donetsk. And the thing is, if you're looking at the Ukrainian position right now, what the Ukrainians are basically trying to do is just make clear that they are in this for the long term, especially in a world where they can no longer guarantee the United States is going to have their back in the same way that the Biden administration did. I think obviously the Zelensky J.D. Vance blow up at the White House was a disaster on like 15 different levels. But what I think it really accomplished in a way that the Biden administration, I've read all the reporting, I still don't understand why this never happened. I think what the Oval Office blow up forced the Ukrainians to finally reckon with is the idea that they cannot take for granted that the United States will supply them with intelligence, supply them with weapons, always have their back no matter what, always be pushing for them to sort of get some sort of settlement in the exact way that's most maximally Ukrainian. What happened this past weekend is what happens when Ukraine realizes it has to be much more independent and be able to actually back itself up without just begging the United States for more. So let's go ahead and take a listen to Steve Bannon's reaction to this operation from the Ukrainians.
The White House has to condemn this immediately and pull all support and tell Lindsey Graham, come home. Or we're going to put you under arrest when you come home. You're stirring it up. Lindsey Graham's over there saying, hey, forget Trump. I got the House and the Senate. We're gonna pass him. You're going to see something in a couple of days. Remember that? He's stirring it up over there. He's telling me they got backing. If they did not give us a heads up on this, full stop, no minerals deal, walk away from all of it. They're irresponsible. They're dragging us into a kinetic third world war. As we said, we're getting dragged in now. Or the deep state is driving us in there. Either of these are not good. Tulsi Gabbard's got to let us know. Did anyone in Intel at all have anything to do with this? Did anybody have a heads up? Did anybody? And if not, who the hell's running the Ukraine desk? Who's running the Russia desk? Same thing with Ratcliffe. This is why Cash and Bongino and Pam Bondi, you got to clear out the deep state. This is a ticking time bomb. And you see what they're going to get us into. Because now inexorably we're being drawn into this. If we didn't know about it, the president, to me, has got to condemn it and got to say we're not going to give it any more support because these people cannot be trusted. You're supposed to be in Turkey today talking peace, not 3,000 miles into Russia blowing up their strategic bombers.
So what do you make of Bannon's position here and kind of the position he occupies in the party overall? Because, you know, he does this thing where he'll be critical of certain things going on in the Trump administration. It's never Trump's fault, though, right? He's very critical of Elon Musk, but it's not Trump's fault. He's very critical of the direction that they're going in Ukraine, but, you know, it's the deep state. It never has anything to do with actually the administration.
Yeah, I think the principal thing that, I just appreciate you noting how in many ways Steve Bannon is a politician and he has to like navigate that. So here's the prime flaw here. So Trump now claimed that his comment that he was getting into the war in Ukraine on day one was sarcastic. I think that was not true at the time. I think that really did reflect his sort of perspective that Biden had bungled this among all the other things that Biden bungled. And therefore you could have gotten a deal like once Trump was actually there. If the US just walks away from Ukraine, and not just like walks away in terms of like giving every single munition they ask for, or like saying we're going to back some sort of NATO or like EU membership, just actually walks away and leaves the table, Russia isn't going to settle. Like, I think it's very clear that Trump wants a settlement. I think in certain ways, the Ukrainians and the Russians want an eventual settlement. It's clearly neither side at this point is getting their end goal, right? Like, it should be noted that like Putin, we should define his end goal as Putin launched this war claiming that Ukraine was a delegitimized, illegitimate Nazi state. Denazification, de-Baathification, like this really should be understood as Russia's Iraq war here, in all the disastrous ways that that metaphor really matters here. Ukraine's going to exist. Ukraine is a nation now. This war has forced Ukraine into a nation. So Putin is not going to get that full maximalist extent. The Ukrainians are also not going to get, because Trump has been very clear in a way the Biden people were not clear, that the U.S. is not going to back Ukraine until they take back every single inch of their territory. So everyone is going to have to get to some form of settlement at some point. However, the issue, though, is if the U.S. walks away and the U.S. makes clear they're not going to back Ukraine at least, or even participate in the process, why would Putin stop from that perspective? And that's the other reason why we should understand Ukraine's need to launch an attack like this. Ukraine has to launch an attack like this to make clear that they are still in this, that this is serious. And even if the Russians are going to take miles of territory in eastern Ukraine, if they're going to slowly but surely march forward, even though things are sort of still kind of stalemated, Russia isn't going to get its eventual total aim. Therefore, you have to get to some form of settlement.
Yeah. Well, and I think this attack underscores why you need some sort of a settlement, because, I mean, it is a dangerous escalation. And, you know, we do have to be wary of the fact that Russia is a nuclear armed superpower and, you know, Putin will be sensitive to, you know, this attack, which is incredibly embarrassing and humiliating, that they were able to penetrate so deeply into Russian territory. So I think it underscores the need for a settlement. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm somewhat sympathetic to the Trump administration here, because I do think it is such a mess and so difficult to untangle at this point. You know, you're talking a little bit about the Biden administration policy. In a lot of ways, it really was the worst of all worlds, because obviously they short-circuited and undercut the original peace talks. So there wasn't pressure early on for some sort of a settlement. I think that was a grave error, you know, underscoring the fact that, listen, there's no guarantees, obviously, that there would have been an ability to have a resolution at that point. But I've also become more sympathetic to the sort of more hawkish faction that says, listen, you're just letting them bleed out slowly. Rather than, and over time, the Biden administration kept going, okay, well, you can have these particular weapons. All right, you can have the long range. All right, you can strike inside of Russia. So it's like, well, if you were going to do that anyway, you may as well have actually given them the tools to be more successful earlier on, push for a peace and be able to get some sort of a settlement that wouldn't be a complete and total disaster for the Ukrainians. So I do think the people who say that the Biden administration policy was kind of the worst of all worlds are absolutely correct. And at this point, it is a, you know, disastrous, brutal, bloody, horrifying mess that lands in the lap of the Trump administration. And I don't think that there is an easy resolution. There's certainly not a resolution that is going to make literally any side happy at this point.
And look, and because the stakes, and this is, you've really highlighted this, because the stakes are nuclear, you cannot have a situation where the U.S. just walks away.
Yeah.
This isn't just another sort of Eurasian conflict. This isn't Azerbaijan versus Armenia. The stakes here are nuclear. The stakes here, and I think if there's, obviously you're not going to have our disagreements about the Cold War and the different ways that it went, but I think a key thing that was achieved during the Cold War is that we limited nuclear proliferation.
The world still exists.
The world
that you can say.
The world
Yes.
still exists. And because the stakes are nuclear in this case, A Russia that just thinks it has total impunity to do whatever it wants without consequences, a world where you could see that type of escalation. I think part of the reason why, and this is where I'll give like a mild